ታገሱን ቆሙ አንዴ ያ ኦልሬዲ ፕሮግራማችንን እንጀምርና ፕሮግራማችንን እንጀምረው የኢትዮጵያ ስደተኞች ማህበር ሊቀመንበር ሳን አልተደረገ ታረጋለ ተከታትሎ አንቲ ሬጅስትሬሽን ኦካይ ፕሮግራም ያላለ ማለት
በመጀመሪያ እንኳን ለዚህ አን ሁላችሁም እዚህ ተገኛችሁ ለማለት እወዳለሁ እና አንድ አጠር ያለ ጽሁፍ አነባለሁኝ በእንግሊዘኛ ነው የሚሆነው I would like to extend my warm welcome to on behalf of the Ethiopian asylum seekers to respected fellow Ethiopians, friends of Ethiopia, different human rights activists, journalists and different political party representatives who are here to show your solidarity and support towards the struggle of Ethiopian asylum seekers for our rights. We are denied Ethiopian asylum seekers received the official news of the repatriation agreement with a profound disappointment and sadness because as well as all we know, Ethiopia was under the brutal dictatorship of the late Prime Minister Zenawi the last 25 years, who is condemned for violation of human rights against citizens. Ethiopians living in Norway as a whole expressed their disapproval and opposition to this repatriation agreement because there is enough and convincing evidences to show that Ethiopia is not a safe country to seekers who have fled the country for fear of torture, imprisonment and persecution. Moreover, overall human rights situation in the country does not justify or speak the repatriation of we asylum seekers. Even after the dictator has gone, conditions are not changed and continue as before. The grave human rights violation and ever-deteriorating socio-economic condition in Ethiopia is well known to Norwegian and the rest of international community. International human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the United Nations State Department have documented and reported the widespread and serious human rights abuses the dictator regime is committing against citizens. As of late, the region has been scrutinizing and repression and closed the political spaces even to the legal oppositions operating in the country. It has enhanced laws such as its anti-terrorism law to prohibit freedom and expression and penalize dissenters. It has imprisoned and sentenced journalists, opposing figures and human rights activists as part of its intensifying crackdown on dissenters and oppositions. As a consequence, a potential exposure situation of depression, fear and resignation has prevailed in the country in the past 21 years. We have also known through the Norwegian media that the Norwegian embassy in Ethiopia has communicated the Norwegian government to ever-deteriorating political situations and mounting repression in Ethiopia. Moreover, many of us export the evil acts of the dictatorialism to the Norwegian public using the relative democracy right we have on the country we are living now. Some of us have lived working in Norwegian for many years and integrated ourselves into the Norwegian society, which we mean needs humanitarian consideration. We are also deeply concerned about the lack of proper consideration of the right and well-being of children in the processing and reviewing of human and asylum application. Against this backdrop of the real situation in Ethiopia, we call on, I will repeat it, we call on the Norwegian government to resist and reconsider its decision to repatriate the rejected Ethiopian asylum seekers and grant protection on both political and humanitarian grounds. Thank you for hearing.
ዘፋንን እናመሰግናለን። ከዚህ በኋላ የተወሰኑ መፈክሮችን እያሰማን እንቀሳቀሳለን ማለት ነው። ጉዟችን በጣም አጭር ነው የሚሆነው። በፍጥነት መሄድ አለብን። ኦልሬዲ ስለዘገየን እዛ የሚጠብቁን እንግዶች ስላሉ በተቻለን መጠን በፍጥነት መሄድ አለብን እና ትንሽ ሰፋ ብሎ ሳይሆን ቀጠን ብሎ ረዘም ያለ ሰልፍ ቢሆን በጣም ይመረጣል። አሁን እንግዲህ ያው መንገዳችንን እንጀምራለን ማለት ነው። Okay, then I want to free all political prisoners in Ethiopia. Free all political prisoners in Ethiopia. We support people's revolution in Ethiopia. We support people's revolution in Ethiopia. The people of Norway, stop supporting dictator regime in Ethiopia. Stop helping killer in Ethiopia. Norway, don't sell us. Don't support dictator in Ethiopia. Don't support dictator in Ethiopia. Norway, where is your humanity? Where is your dignity? Where is Geneva Convention? Where is Geneva Convention? Välkommen till alla deras som har här för att stötta upp. Så då vi ska bringa för oss appeller med Kari från Atlantic Center. Tack för oss.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yes. Earlier this year, Norway struck a deal with the dictatorship in Ethiopia. So far, this return agreement has not been effectuated, but there is a clear and highly critical of many of the decisions and of the return agreement itself. In fact, the return agreement between the Norwegian democracy and the Ethiopian dictatorship risks being a human rights disaster. We think that many of the people who now face deportation should have been granted a permit to stay in the first rounds in the UDI system. As many of you know, the decisions from UDI and Utlendingsnemnda are often very standardized. Sometimes almost copy and paste, and filled with standard phrases that often are factually imprecise or wrong. The asylum system is not perfect, but the most serious flaw of the asylum system is that politicians usually act as if it is. Caseworkers who do not speak any of the Ethiopian languages and who often have never even been to Ethiopia try to guess at what torturers almost on the other side of the globe might do, whom they might persecute, whom they might not care about. Horrible cases where both we and independent researchers believe there is a genuine risk of torture have even been rejected in a simplified procedure in Utlendingsnemnda by one nemndleder alone. I understand the fear of the Ethiopian asylum seekers here in Norway. However, I do not understand, and I am amazed by this lack of fear among the caseworkers and the politicians. The lack of fear that they might make mistakes, that they might in fact be sending people to persecution. Because of this, because of the persecution they have suffered in Ethiopia and the lack of a fair assessment of the claims in Norway, Ethiopians have lived in fear in Norway for 5, 10, even 15 years. In this atmosphere of fear here in Norway, many Ethiopians have created new lives for themselves on the margins of Norwegian society. Often of an age where people establish families, they have established families, not accepting the idea that persons fleeing a dictatorship, refugees, should somehow be denied the privilege, the joy, the refuge of family. This is often summarized by Norwegian politicians as asylum seekers using or even abusing their children to get a residence permit. These are politicians that might not have spoken to any of these people they accuse, but who so easily turn parents' love into something cynical. The cynicism is not the Ethiopians, but the politicians who negotiated a return agreement with a dictatorship, who pay money to a dictatorship, who cooperate with the security services of a dictatorship in order to rid themselves of a few fellow human beings. It is upon us, the Norwegian civil society, and the activists to do all we can to keep Ethiopian refugees out of the Ethiopian torture cells. We must do all we can to prevent forced deportations and fight for Ethiopian asylum seekers' right to a life in Norway. Thank you.
Tusen takk for Kari fra Pressesenter. ትንሽ ወደኋላ ትንሽ ተገኘ የምዳል ታፈራልኩም
Takk for at jeg får komme. Takk for at dere viser deres store engasjement. Jeg har lyst til å fokusere på asylbarna. For barn det mest verdifulle vi har. Og barna våre, ja, det fortjener det beste vi kan gi dem. Barn barn. Samme, uansett bakgrunn. De først og fremst barn, og så noen asylbarn. Asylbarna må og skal ha samme rettssikkerhet og kvalitet på tilbudene fra myndighetene som andre barn i Norge. Måten som vi i Norge har behandlet mange barn som søker asyl på, ja, det har vi fått kraftig kritikk på, blant annet fra FN. Det må være et mål at ingen barn skal vokse opp på asylmottak. Asylmottak skal være midlertidig bosted. De ikke ment til å være et hjem for barn og foreldre over lang tid. Men likevel så kjenner vi og dere på kroppen historiene, smertene om at mange barn og foreldre nettopp på asylmottak I mange år. Vi må skape et samfunn som bedre ivaretar barna, sier vi. Vi sier at hensynet til barnas beste ikke blir godt nok ivaretatt. Like foran innvandringspolitiske hensyn. Det må vi ta et oppgjør med. For I Norge så bor det en rekke barn som enten har kommet hit alene eller sammen med familiene, og som nå har bodd I Norge så mange år at de faktisk norske. Barn som har Norge som sitt eneste hjemland, som ikke husker Afghanistan, Somalia, Eritrea eller Etiopia. De har sterkere tilknytning til Norge enn sine foreldres hjemland. Det faktumet tillegges ikke sterkt nok vekt av utlendingsmyndighetene, slik som vi ser på det. Vi mener at barn blir offer når regjeringen kaster seg inn I konkurransen om å ha den strengeste asylpolitikken I Europa. I Stortinget nå, I vår nasjonalforsamling, så har vi en stortingsmelding som heter Barn på flukt til behandling. Regjeringen sier rett ut der at praksisen til UNE har vært for streng når de har vurdert hensyn til barns beste opp mot det vi kaller innvandringsregulerende hensyn. Til tross for at regjeringen sier det, så har de ingen tiltak og ingen ønsker om å endre. Vi må ha en endring. Og dette får vi støtte på av deres organisasjoner, som har snakket lenge med oss om dette. Vi mener at vi må ha en tydeliggjøring I lovverket, gjennom vurderingen av hva som barns beste. Og det må skrives helt klart og tydelig at barns beste må være viktigere enn innvandringsregulerende hensyn. Det ikke bare viktig, men det faktisk det viktigste. Barnekonvensjonen, artikkel nummer 3, sier faktisk akkurat at ved alle handlinger som berører barn, skal barnets beste være det grunnleggende. Barnets beste skal være det viktigste. KrF på lag med barnekonvensjonen. Vi må bare få med oss regjeringen. Jeg imponert over den innsatsen dere står for. Imponert over å se dere her I dag. Den jobben og det engasjementet dere utviser utrolig viktig. Fortsett med det. Ha tro på at det går an å endre. Vi tror det går an å løse. For det dere gjør I dag utgjør en forskjell. Dere kjemper mot urettferdighet. Vi I KrF ønsker å være med dere I den kampen. Og jeg, og vi som på Stortinget fra oss, der inne, vi skal fortsette å kjempe for asylbarna.
Tusen takk for Line fra KrF. ኦኬ አሁንም ብዙ ተናጋሪዎች አሉ ያብል ባረስ ሲሊት til representanter fra KrF og Venstre. Vi etiopiske asylsøkere her I Norge, flest av oss har bodd mer enn 17 år og har jobbet I mange år og har betalt skatt. Mange har barn etter at vi har bodd I byen, akkurat som norsk folk. Nå de fleste av oss lever tilbake I mottak, og vi vet ikke hvor mange år vi skal fortsette sånne liv. Og vi ser ikke håp fra regjeringen her I Norge. Vi har nå statsminister Zenawi is gone. Men vi har ikke sett noen forandringer. Den nye statsministeren ser han har ikke kommet på noe nytt, og han skal fortsette hva diktator Zenawi har gjort. og folk sitter fortsatt I fengsel, så vi har ikke sett noen ting. Vi alle etiopiske asylsøkere her, vi kan ikke reise til diktatorisk regime I Etiopia. Takk.
Det samme regime som
ja, det samme regime som styrer landet, så vi har ikke fått noen håp. Den neste representanten fra Venstre som skal ha appell Daniel. Takk for at du kom, Daniel fra Venstre parti.
Kjære venner, den rødgrønne regjeringen har siden 2005 strammet asylpolitikken strammere og strammere. Og regjeringen har til tider ført en asylpolitikk som I strid med menneskerettighetene. For eksempel utsending av asylanter til umenneskelige forhold I Hellas, som EMD slo ned på I 2011. Men I Soria Moria-erklæringen, den første, så står det at regjeringen vil føre en human, solidarisk og rettssikker flyktning- og asylpolitikk. Margaret Olin viste I boken Ingen vet hvem jeg fra 2007 at asylpolitikken ikke hadde blitt mer human. Historie på historie I boken viser det samme. Boken etterlyser langt mer medmenneskelighet. Det gikk ikke slik. Norsk asylpolitikk ble senere ytterligere skjerpet. Arbeiderpartiet lot ikke Fremskrittspartiet ha sine egne velgere I fred, og I dag det vanskelig å se forskjell på de tre største partiene, Arbeiderpartiet, Høyre og Fremskrittspartiet, I utøvelsen av norsk asylpolitikk. Denne asylpolitikken har Venstre og KrF stått alene om å kritisere I Stortinget, mens flertallet for øvrig har mestet om at asylpolitikken skal være streng, men rettferdig, med menneskerettsstrid på det siste punktet. Nå har Norge framforhandlet en returavtale med Etiopia, som åpner for retur av flyktninger, og for tvangsretur av de som ikke reiser frivillig. Ifølge Amnesty International Etiopia et land som ansvarlig for omfattende menneskerettighetsbrudd mot folk som I opposisjon til det nåværende regimet. Og det rapporteres om vilkårlig fengsling, drap og tortur. Landet har fått en negativ demokratisk utvikling I det siste, noe som øker min og Venstre sin bekymring for rettssikkerheten til etiopiske flyktninger som nå risikerer å bli sendt tilbake. Venstre mener I likhet med KrF at utsendelse av asylbarn med sterk tilknytning til Norge et brudd på barnekonvensjonen og på norsk lov. Det står helt klart at barns tilknytning til riket skal tillegges vekt. På hvilke måter vil regjeringen sikre seg at flyktninger som blir returnert ikke utsettes for menneskerettighetsbrudd som vilkårlig fengsling, drap og tortur? Det har de ikke svart på. I mars la Venstre fram 12 forslag om asylbarn og papirløse på Stortinget. Et av dem gikk på at barn og foreldre som har oppholdt seg I Norge I mer enn 3 år, skal få rett til ny behandling av tidligere avslag. Alle 12 forslag ble nedstemt. Venstre vil ha en mer human og rettferdig asyl- og flyktningpolitikk. Vi sier ja til frihet, nei til tvang. Vi sier ja til menneskerettigheter, nei til diktatur. Vi sier ja til en ny asylpolitikk. For når enkeltmennesker opplever at reglene blodig urettferdige og protesterer mot dem, da det politikere sin plikt å revurdere reglene umiddelbart. Tusen takk for oppmerksomheten.
Tusen takk for Daniel fra Venstre. Takk skal du ha.
The Swedish journalist Johan Persson and Martin Schibbye were recently taken out of prison after being a year in Ethiopian prison. They were convicted to 11 years in prison for terrorism, but what they did was journalism. I will quote a bit from BBC from a couple of days ago, because the two journalists, Johan Persson and Martin Schibbye, have been speaking about their time in prison in Ethiopia. The pair were found guilty of entering the country illegally and supporting a rebel group, the Ogaden National Liberation Front. Their lengthy jail term put the treatment of journalists in Ethiopia under the international spotlight. Johan Persson told the BBC World Service program Newsday that conditions in the prison in which they were held were poor. It was 200% overcrowded, it was very hot, there was lack of water, it was dusty, there were rats, fleas, and many people were sick with HIV or tuberculosis, he said. But he said the conditions were not as significant as the other inmates. What's interesting is who they put in there, journalists and political opposition. Now that I want to stress. What is interesting is who they put in there. Although the pair admit that they entered Ethiopia illegally, they argue that the trial was unfair. In fact, the Ethiopian government made a fake film about the arrest, about what went beforehand. So it was a fake film. And the trial was a joke, said Mr. Persson. Meles Zenawi was saying on national television 3 or 4 weeks before the trial started that we were guilty. They also believe the charge of moral support for terrorism, of which they were found guilty, has been misused against other journalists in Ethiopia. For the last few years, Ethiopia has been using its anti-terror legislation to crack down on the media and to crack down on journalism. It is in fact so very important that Johan Persson and Martin Schibbye now are able to be witnesses who give internationally testimony to how the Ethiopian regime treat not only journalists but all kinds of opposition. The two of them come from Sweden, and Sweden have the same democratic ideals as we say to hold in Norway. Freedom of speech, free press, free elections, judges and a court system that protects justice, and not a court system that functions as an instrument for suppression, police and military that don't use torture or threats towards human beings. Norway should now listen carefully to what our neighbor journalists from Sweden have to tell. And the Norwegian government should really take in what they experienced for a year. Many people in Ethiopia experience for years and years, put in the overcrowded prison, totally helpless, most of the time without anyone to tell their story. Amnesty International's report on Ethiopia from 2011 fully confirms what Persson and Schibbye tell us. It says Ethiopia's independent press was barely able to function. This is about the election in May. Journalists worked in a climate of fear because of the threat of state harassment and prosecution. Information was closely controlled by state bodies, including the Radio and Television Agency and Ethiopian Press, the state publisher. Pre-election violence and repression were also frequent. State resources, assistance and opportunities were used repeatedly before May's election as leverage to pressure citizens to leave opposition parties. Education opportunities, civil service jobs and food assistance were often contingent on membership of the ruling party. Immediately prior to the election, voters in Addis Ababa were reportedly threatened with the withdrawal of state assistance
ever didn't vote the right party. The build-up to the elections was punctuated by incidents of political violence. Well, the Norwegian government, regjeringen, all too well know about suppression and violence towards journalists and political opposition in Ethiopia. They know. Until 2005, the Norwegian government was said to be among the sharpest critics of the violations of human rights in Ethiopia. As late as a year ago, the Prime Minister Stoltenberg expressed concerns about the development. And then, early this year, they decided to form an agreement with the Ethiopian regime which opens for forced return of Ethiopian asylum seekers. Why? How can they do this when they know? In fact, I have difficulties in understanding these decisions. It puts so many people in a terrible, unsecure situation. Many of you have fled from violence and threats, and you came here for protection and safety, and I fear that you don't feel safe in Norway anymore after this agreement. People have contributed to the Norwegian society by working and paying taxes. You have raised your children here, and you are all put in this terrible situation. How come that Norway can do this? The explanation is to be found in the asylum politics, the political wish of the hardening of the asylum politics. This field of the politics in Norway has become a field that doesn't really look like other fields of politics. It's difficult to recognize the Norway we know from other fields when we look closely at asylum politics and some of the results for people. All rhetoric from the leading parties, the three big parties, Arbeiderpartiet, Høyre og Fremskrittspartiet, is about hardening, about firmness, and about communicating this. It is like we almost never hear about the need to protect refugees. It feels like the government has built a wall that consists of hard rhetorics and hard politics, and it's almost possible to come to discuss how these politics actually affect people and hurt people. Some say that Arbeiderpartiet has lost its soul. I hope that Arbeiderpartiet will find its soul again. I say that this politics has gone way, way too far. This politics has lost sight of some of its earlier intentions of protecting refugees and keeping up dignity. A dangerous dynamic has taken the place of political reason and humanism. Now it seems that there is no place for reforms. The rhetoric of Statssekretær Lønseth is particularly hard. And in a way he brags about it. He says, we have the most consequent asylum politics of all times. The political leaders turn away from dialogue again and again. And I say there is a danger of spreading cynicism in the society. The agreement with Ethiopia is the worst example of this development. But there are many examples. No health care for paperless people, in spite of the fact that illness doesn't look for papers. Children living for years in uncertainty, a situation we won't allow for other children in Norway. Suicides among asylum seekers in mottakene, they aren't even registered, they aren't counted. No one is doing research on these tragedies. And people aren't allowed to work to support their families. You people know all these things all too well. I know that. I'm shameful. Well, I say, this politics has to change. This political climate has to change. protection, not deportation for the Ethiopians in Norway. And we will all work together to change this situation. Thank you.
ኦኬ ሲማን ይባላል። ሲማን ትንሽ ነገር መናገር ፈልጋለሁ ይላል። ገኖች ነው ማውራት የሚችለው ለሱ ነው ድሉን የምሰጠው።
Jag heter Simon och jag har tänkt till att si att det är ingen som ska dra det blir och att alla sammen ska ha fred. Och hvis det är någon som har bekymringer så är det ingenting att vara rädd för. Man kan inte vara rädd. Det motsatte av redd, det er ikke redd. Man skal være modig. Man skal tørre ting. Og det beste av alt, man må tørre å gjøre det man aldri har tenkt til å gjøre. Og det synes jeg er fred.
በጣም ነው እናመሰግነው ይሳቅ። እንግዲህ ያው በጣም ትልቅ ነገር ነው የተናገረው ከሰማን ማለት ነው። ሁላችንም ያው መፍራት የለብንም ግን ማድረግ ያለብንን ነገር ማድረግ አለብን ነው የሚለው። በጣም ትንሽ ልጅ ነው እና ሁላችንም ማድረግ ያለብንን ነገር ማድረግ አለብን። ዝም ብለን ቁጭ ብንል ጥቅም የለውም ነው የሚለው። እንግዲህ ያው የሚሰማ ካለ ይስማ ማለት ነው። ምክርም ከፈለጋችሁ ምንድነው የምናደርገው? እንግዲህ ያው መጠየቅ ነው እሱንም ማለት ነው። ኦኬ እንግዲህ እሺ እንጠብቃለን ትንሽ። አሁን እንግዲህ ከዚህ ቀጥሎ ንግግር የሚያደርጉልን ዶክተር ሙሉ አለም ናቸው። አላቅም እዚህ በአቅራቢያ እንዳሉ አለ። አረ ዶክተር ሙሉ አለም ፍራ ኢትዮጵስ ኮሚኒቲ ሃር ኢን ኖርጌ ታቆራሉ ዶክተር ሙሉ አለም
እሺ አመሰግናለሁ። በየትኛው ቋንቋ እንደምናገር አላውቅም። ኦኬ Jag ska prova lite på norsk. Så jag tar på summera jag på amharisk. መጀመሪያ በትንሽ በኖርsk ልሞክርና አልችልም ብዙ ኖርsk ከዛ በኋላ በአማርኛ ደግሞ ሳምራይዝ አደርጋለሁ። በመጀመሪያ ስለተጋበዝኩ በጣም አመሰግናለሁ። ያው ትልቅ ንግግር አላደርግም። Jag tackar att dere har inviterat mig idag till att tala här. Det är väldigt bra att man ser många folk på en demonstration. Det är inte så vanligt att se många folk. Etiopier är, jag tror, på första plats på världens basis för att demonstrera på gatorna i Europa och Nordamerika. Jag tror alla vet varför det är. Vi demonstrerar, vi ser våra bekymringar till västliga auktoriteter, selv om de inte hörer skickligt vad vi menar. Etiopier har stora problem i Etiopien. Därför är flera förlater landet. Vi demonstrerar stadigt fordi det är inte lov att demonstrera, det är inte lov att skriva, det är inte lov att se meningen fritt i Etiopien. Vi demonstrerar inte bara att spåra att vi vill ha beskyttelse och asyl i Norge. Vi demonstrerar slik att västliga land hjälper oss att skapa demokrati i Etiopien. Vi vet att få uppehåll och få asyl i annat land är icke ändliga lösningen. Den ändliga lösningen är att skapa demokrati, rättfärdighet i Etiopien. Idag vi i västen har möjlighet att demonstrera och visa att det är flera problem i Etiopien. Men det är hundravis, tusenvis av etiopier i arabiska land som har icke möjlighet att demonstrera och som för en väldigt förfärlig liv. Här i Norge, det är flera etiopier, jag tror det är mer än 500-600 stycken, som lever och för en väldigt förfärlig liv. De har många bekymringar och vi menar dessa människorna har en välbegrundat frykt för förföljelse, tortyr, hvis de returnerar till Etiopien. Ett land som Norge, som är alltid på första plats för fredliga missionen, har signerat en returavtal med Etiopien, som många etiopier icke tror på det. Vi har icke väntat den från Norge. Vi har icke väntat den från Norge. Norge som är i Mittöstern, Norge som är i Afrika, Norge som är i Europa för att skapa fred mellan människorna. Norska myndigheter vet nöjaktigt hvordan regimet i Etiopien är. De är fascister. Det är politiskt baserat på etnicitet. Och en som icke stöter regimet har kontinuerlig förföljelse. Vi menar att etiopier som bor i Norge, de är alltid på demonstration, de är utsatt för media och de vet vilka konsekvenser de ska ha när de vänder tillbaka till Etiopien. Vi därför ser en gång till att norska asylmyndigheter hör vad dessa folken säger. Kära landsmän, vi är också tacknämliga för den vi har flera vänner i Norge som NOAS, som Antirasistiskt center och andra oppositionspartier som hör icke till regeringen, som alltid stöter oss med att spöra våra bekymringar. Den ändliga lösningen är i våra händer. Vi måste stå samman. Vi måste skapa en stark gruppering där det basis för att stå för våra rättigheter. I think ይህንን ካልኩ በጣም ይበቃኛል። በጣም ዘብረቅረቅ ያለ ንግግር ነው። በመጨረሻ ማለት የምፈልገው ምንድነው ይሄንን ሳጠቃልለው እኛ ኢትዮጵያኖች ብዙ እንሰለፋለን፣ ብዙ ድምጻችን እናሰማለን፣ አውሮፓም አሜሪካም። በዚህ እኛን የሚቀድም አገር ያለ አይመስለኝም በበኩሌ ካልተሳሳትኩኝ። ይሄን የምናደርግበት ዋናው ምክንያታችን በእነኛ ሀገሮች ውስጥ ለመኖር ፈቃድ ለማግኘት ብቻ አይደለም። ፈቃድ ያላቸው ጥሩ ኑሮ የሚኖሩ ኢትዮጵያውያን በየቀኑ መንገድ ላይ ቆመው ለኢትዮጵያ ይጮሃሉ። ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ሰላም የለም። ኢትዮጵያ ጨቋኝ መንግስት ነው ያለው። ኢትዮጵያ በዘር የተከፋፈለች ሀገር እየሆነች ነው። ኢትዮጵያ የምትባል ሀገር እየጠፋች ነው። እባካችሁን ስሙን እያሉ ብዙዎች ኢትዮጵያኖች ይጮሃሉ። ኢትዮጵያ ልትበታተን ነው፣ ልትጠፋ ነው፣ ሊያጠፋት ነው ስንል ለውሸት ወይም ለምክንያት አይደለም። ብዙ የሚታዩ ነገሮች አሉ። እኛ ምናልባት ዛሬ እድለኞች ሆነን አሳይለም ለመጠየቅ ያሰብንባቸው ሀገሮች ደርሰናል። ግን በእያንዳንዱ ደቂቃ በእግራቸው እየወጡ በረሃ የሚቀሩ ባህር ውስጥ የሚሰጥሙ ብዙ ወገኖች አሉ። እህቶቻችን አረብ ሀገር ሰው የማያየው መከራ እያዩ ነው ያሉት። ለዚህ ለመድረስ እኛ እዚህ ሀገር አሳይለም ማግኘታችን ብቻ አይደለም ይጠቅማል። ለእውነተኛ ዲሞክራሲ እኛ ደሃ እኮ እኛ ብቻ አይደለም የመጣችሁት ለኢኮኖሚ ይሉናል። እኛ ብቻ አይደለም እንዳ በጣም ብዙ ሀገሮች አሉ ሰላም ፍቅር እና ዲሞክራሲ ካለ በደሃ ሀገራችን መኖር እንችላለን ለምንለው ይሄ ሁላችን ነው ስለዚህ አንዴም ለመጨረሻም እባካችሁ አብረን እንቆም እንታገል የዛችን ሀገር መከራ እንታደግ ይሄን ለማድረግ ደግሞ እዚህ አብረን መቆም ስንችል ነው ስለዚህ በዚህ ሰላማዊ ሰልፍ ላይ የምንገኝ አብዛኞቻችን ምናልባት የመኖሪያ ፈቃድ የለንም የተወሰነ ሰዎች አለን ሁላችንም አንድ ሆነን የሚያገናኘን ጠንካራ ስብስብ ያስፈልገናል ያ ስብስብ ብዙ ነገሮችን መስራት ይችላል አንድ ቋንቋ መናገር እንችላለን በአንድነት ጥያቄያችንን ማቅረብ እንችላለን እርዳታም ስንፈልግ በአንድነት በተወካዮቻችን አማካይነት መጠየቅ እንችላለን ስለዚህ ለዚህ ሁሉ አንድ ጠንካራ ማህበር መመስረት አስፈላጊ ነው ዛሬ እንደሰማሁት አንድ ማህበር ይሄ ማህበር ይተናከራል አይ ቲንክ ዛሬ የሰራው ስራ በጣም ጥሩ ነው ስለዚህ ለዚህ ማህበር ያለንን ድጋፍ ሰጥተን በዛ ትግላችን እንድናጠናክር ጠይቃለሁ ስለተሰጠኝ ድል በጣም እግዚአብሔር ይስጥልኝ
Norway እጃችሁን አንቀሳቅሱት Norway አረጀ የለም Norway The people of Norway The people of Norway Listen us Norway Stop supporting killer in Ethiopia dictator regime in Ethiopia Listen us Norway Where is your humanity? Respect Geneva Convention. Norway. Where is your humanity? We demand protection. We demand protection. Save our life. More humanity now. Okay, እንቀጥላለን. We suffered a lot. Enough is enough. በቃ ስቃዩም ይብቃ ወያኔም በቃ Enough is enough. እሺ እንቀጥላለን ያው ሌላ ሰው ካለ ያው ተጋብላችሁ ማሰማት እንችላለን ኦኬ Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Norway. The people of Norway. Where is your humanity? Where is your dignity? Respect Geneva Convention. Norway. Listen us. Where is Geneva Convention? Where is your humanity? Where is your dignity? Yara. Stop working with corrupted regime of Ethiopia. Yara. Stop. Stop. Norway. Stop. Norway. Bata. Wayane. Bata. Norway. Where is your humanity? Where is your dignity? Listen us. Norway.
Norway. Norway. Listen us. Save us. Norway. Norway. Norway.
Ethiopia continues to be among the top 10 enemies of the press in the entire world, imprisoning and forcefully exiling journalists. The continued imprisonment of Iskandar Naga and the exile of more than 130 journalists is the evidence. 2. Thousands continue to be imprisoned for political reasons because of their perceived or real affiliation with opposition groups. 3. The political opposition in Ethiopia has been systematically and forcefully decimated by the ruling party and its state institutions. The imprisonment of all of the CDU leaders in 2005 and the recent imprisonment of other opposition leaders such as Andu'alem Arage is another example of this. The civil society is paralyzed as a result of the draconian law that prohibits basic freedom of association. 5. Elections are rigged, and any protest in this regard is answered with beating, killing, and massive imprisonment in cruel and inhuman conditions. No one has yet been held accountable for the killing of nearly 200 peaceful demonstrators in 2005. Dear compatriots, as documented by many reputable organizations, including Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, Amnesty International, and many others, in the last 21 years, the situation in Ethiopia has been deteriorating from time to time. Ethiopia is now, for all practical purposes, a one-party dictatorial state. Of course, as witnessed throughout the world, and most recently in the Arab Spring, brutality and repression is unsustainable. Such repression will undoubtedly lead to the national uprising, and the consequences will be very difficult to predict. Despite this dismal fact, the Norwegian government has been collaborating and giving aid to this dictatorial regime. Worst of all, it has been making a deal to forcefully return Ethiopian asylum seekers to Ethiopia. As you all know, we have been repeatedly protesting against this deal by all means, diplomatically, demonstrations, hunger strikes, and whatnot, and with the support also of friendly and concerned Norwegian civilians and politicians. But to our dismay, the Norwegian authorities are not listening to our cry. Please allow me to use this opportunity to thank all who have shared our pains and relentlessly fought on our behalf. With the death of the long-time dictator Meles Zenawi, many might believe that Ethiopia now has great opportunity to leave the past behind and engage in a truly democratic process. But the regime has not shown any sign of change these days. To the contrary, the current Prime Minister is vowing to continue on the path of the late dictator Meles Zenawi. Unless we see the following measures taken by the current regime: 1. Releasing all political prisoners. 2. Repeal the repressive laws such as the Charities and Associations Act, Anti-Terrorism Act. 3. Respect freedom of the press, freedom of association, and freedom of expression. And 4. Engage in all-inclusive national dialogue to pave the way for transition towards a constitutional democratic system. Then, Ethiopia is still not a safe place to return asylum seekers. And hence, we strongly appeal to the Norwegian government to repeal the return agreement with Ethiopia and follow accepted international humanitarian rights agreements in treating Ethiopian asylum seekers. Thank you.